Brady Bunch, I probably had that feeling for. That maybe, a father figure thing. But then when the Partridge Family came on, it's like, okay, I think I'm more interested in a boyfriend here, not the father figure.
Right.
I think that's kind of, and let's face it, David, especially when he went solo, I mean, he was a rock star. He wasn't just, he was a rock star, and he was like Mick Jagger if,
Yeah.
Mick Jagger bathed or something, poofed his hair or whatever, he was, so he was that. So that was, it's just kind of bigger than life, and maybe you do kind of wish you were that, kind of want to be that.
Now, you mentioned earlier on about his songs being full of sadness. Did his
Well,
music actually take you to a brighter place? But were you always touched by the sadness in his songs?
I always have been touched by those, actually, even other artists later on as I got older, needing feeling or whatever. But with him, it was definitely when the Rock Me Baby album came out. My cousin Barb had actually gave me that year for Christmas. It's probably the first album that ever just blew me away. As much as I played Cherish all the time and the Partridge Family albums, that one, it was something different. It was a little more rock. The voice was a little deeper, a little edgier. And every single song, I to this day, I still would put that as one of the best albums ever, or favorite. I don't usually say best, I say favorite, but I'd put it up there with Rumors, Fleetwood Mac Rumors. To me, it's in that league. Every single song I just love. There was just booming them albums out between the solo albums and the Partridge Family albums. It was hard to keep up with them, and I think like Crossword Puzzle and Notebook, somehow I skipped over those and went right to Bulletin Board. Well, Bulletin Board fit perfectly as a follow-up to Rock Me Baby. I'm like, well, this is perfect, So those other two albums, I didn't get those till years later. And I always, even today, I listen to them. They're fun to listen to in that I can certain songs you remember from an episode or something. And maybe, I was listening to one the other day, and I don't even think it's the right song, but it gave me the visual of that little Native American girl dancing in front of the stage when they're singing at that reservation, the little girl, so cute, that was, and I don't even think it was the same song. I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's the visual I had. And those two albums, I can listen to them that way, but I just don't feel the albums as much as I do. Bulletin Board, that was another one like Rock Me Baby for me that I just tuned constantly. It was just a perfect follow-up for me. I think that evolution of sound kind of continued with that. Now, when Dreams came out, Dreams Are Nothing More Than Wishes, here in the States, he was setting the rest of the world on fire at that point as a solo artist, the concerts and stuff. Here in the States, radio wasn't playing. They pretty much, and I'm sure it was the stigma of being associated with the Partridge Family here in the States. That's kind of, they weren't playing it at all. So I didn't even know, since I probably didn't buy every magazine, because I would only skim secretly skim them in the aisles. I didn't know that album came out. But there was a store that was a block from us. And it was an odd store. It was a hodgepodge. It had new stuff. It had old stuff. It was kind of a weird, generalized store. But they had records. Like every store back then had records. They always had a record department. And they just throw them there. They no order or whatever. You just had to flip through and hope you found something you want. Well, I was doing that one day, and there it was. Dreams Are Nothing. I'm like, oh my goodness. I didn't even know it existed. Of course, I bought that one, went home, and just I played it and looked at the pictures of the writing and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be honest, I was kind of taken aback by it, that age, because Rock Me Baby is what I was, and then that one, it was like, well, this is different than, this is it's a much more mature, the material was more adult, I think, is the thing, Bali High, May, Fever, even the remake of Summer Days, which I put as one of my all-time favorites, was totally different. And just I was kind of taken aback by it. Of course, Daydreamer is wonderful, and the singing is wonderful. It seems like his little higher pitch, like the higher side of his voice, I think he used on that album. And I enjoy listening to it now. But I remember at that time being, wow. And this is the album that, went number one overseas, So, and it's great stuff. But like I said, it was just not what I was used to, which is the same thing with The Higher They Climb, which came out. I had no problem. I'm not sure that one was, maybe because it was the first one from RCA. Maybe that's why it was so available here. And that one, what was interesting about that, where I was taken aback by the one this was like what's the word I want to use? It was a shock. It was actually a shock to the system in a way, because of the visuals, the album cover visual, the visual of the story that the album tells, the rise and the fall, and you're visualizing, well, this is the fall of my idol. That's in the back of the cover is literally David Cassidy, falling to earth. So that was a little rough on the system, as a fan, as a little young teen, early teen fan. I'm not even sure if I was a teenager, to be honest.
Did those images alarm you?
Well, yeah, they were. I think, yeah, a little bit. I mean, that's very strong imagery. The music was very good. When I'm a rock and roll star, and I would listen to it all the time. A Common Thief was one I seemed to be elevated towards. Maybe the theatrics of it or whatever it was. But again, it fit right in with that cover, that back cover, that kind of, the dark side. But I thought, well, you know what? It was almost like he was doing a musical exorcism of the previous 4 years. That's basically what that album represents, I think, is exercising Keith Partridge, exercising the Teen Idol, the concerts, everything that he went through. I think he was like, okay, I'm getting rid of that today with this album. And he did. I mean, I think he really succeeded in that regards, because when you listen to the following album, it's like, okay, now he's having fun. You go from, all right, let's get rid of this. Let's get the kinks out or whatever. And then Home is Where the Heart Is. He takes off and he has fun. And it helps that they have all the pictures of them having fun. But I mean, you can tell he seems to be enjoying himself, making music he wants to do. And it is a great album. I do enjoy, I don't know if my heart is in it as much as it was Rock Me Baby and Cherish, because they were earlier. It is a highlight, I think, definitely a highlight of his career. And at that time, I think, I don't know. It just seemed like he was doing what he enjoyed. Let's talk about the vocals, though, because that's, and I don't mean to be thrown all over here, but his voice on those two albums, we're talking a whole different feel. You get the early departures for him in the early albums. You got that whole dreamy kind of, that really the deeper voice, the very like butter voice, and then with these much grittier. Now, it could be on purpose that he wanted to go over that. But when I was listening to it back then, I kept thinking, did he damage his voice? That's where I was always wondered. Because he had gone all those tours and the workload that he had prior to that, he had to have been worn down at some point. And I kind of feel like the grittiness in his voice I kind of felt like maybe that was a result of all the concert touring that he did. That's what I thought at the time. I thought, well, he just, it seems rougher. It's rougher, it's edgier, and again, he might just say, I want to sing like this. And that's how, but to me, that's what it sounded like. And again, if you go 10 years later, when he comes out with Romance, I mean, it's refreshed and new, and it doesn't have that, that rough sound, the hoarse kind of sound. I don't want to be uncomplimentary, but that's how I felt it sounded like. Even though the music's fun and I listen to it, and, I still enjoy it.
Do you think that had he been a solo artist and not had the baggage of Keith Partridge, he would have perhaps been a bigger international star than he even was?
Well, I think, yes, I think he would have been in the United States. And I think that would have set the tone. Internationally, this is from the American view, it seems like you guys appreciated him a lot more as a solo artist than what Americans did. They weren't willing to give up the Keith Partridge thing, or or at least the powers that be. So yes, I'm sure. But then again, if it wasn't for Keith Partridge, he would have been probably an actor. He might have stayed in the acting and not even sung. Who knows if he would have sung or not? Because he was certainly on the road to being, a well-regarded actor at that point. And I think it's interesting, after the Dreams Are Nothing More Than Wishes, I never knew about, here in America, I never even heard of the Getting It in the Streets until probably 86 is probably when I heard of that album for the first time, because I never knew it existed. From here, I thought it was interesting. And I always wondered myself because I don't remember him ever saying this, but when his father passed away and he talked about how devastated he was, and I noticed then right after that, he goes into acting. And I always kind of wondered if going into acting was a way to maybe connect with his father, who he no longer had a chance to connect to. And felt that was kind of the case. I kind of wondered anyway. I speculated as a fan, because I don't recall him ever actually. I know he talked about how devastated he was, but I don't remember him actually saying that. But when I watched this, when I look at his career, it seems like it all lines up that way.
Yes.
Because he goes more into theater and stuff in acting, stuff that his father did. And I just wondered, I always wondered, I speculated, I should say, it's like when he did the police story thing, I never knew that either. And I'm like, okay, now how is this possible? Now get me. I know I should slap myself because I used to read TV Guide religiously. TV Guide was like my mag. I could tell you want to know what was on a certain time. I could tell you what was on a certain time. But police story was never on my radar. I never watched it. I wasn't familiar with it. I knew what it was, but I think I always glossed over it. And I'm like, how in the world all these years, how did I gloss over that? Because usually if there's something David Cassidy, I elevate towards it, but somehow police story was enough of a block that I didn't quite get that, I wish I would have known that. And,
Do you think that David was underappreciated as an artist and especially as a songwriter?
Certainly. I mean, yes, here in America, most definitely. It seems, I'm not sure I can put it into words correctly, but again, they see him as the teen idol, and rightfully so. When Romance came out, I think he certainly got the attention overseas. I was always shocked that was never released here. It, again, is that appreciation overseas that he never got here. The only reason I knew about The Last Kiss was Casey Kasem here in his radio countdown show. Every week, I'd be at work listening to it. And when he get to the top 10, he would do a little snippet of the top 10 songs in the UK. And David Cassidy appears with The Last Kiss, and I'm like, whoa, what? I was excited that he was in the top 10, but I'm like, how do I get my hands on this? Well, we had a Goldmine magazine here that was like kind of like eBay today, but in a magazine form. Yeah. Everyone that sold something record related stuff, imports or whatever, would put their ads in there. So I was able to get Romance and the live album that came after that. The Greatest Hits Live that came after that. It was only through that because it never was released here. But now that live album, and that's where I think the rest of his career was really kind of dominated by the success he had live. There's that period between 75 and 85 where I think he really, and again, this is my opinion, I just think he almost like he's floating, but he was just kind of wide. But then when Romance came out, it was like a little more of a focused thing. The album was a success overseas. I think the live performances that led up to that were successful over there and then put on vinyl, I think that really set the tone for the rest of his career. Because whenever he had the most success, it was when he was either on stage in front of an audience relating to that audience relating to him, back and forth. There in live concerts on Broadway, and certainly the success he had in Vegas. And then touring. He'd always record. There would be an album every so often. For one reason or another, there'd be some success, but not what you would hope. But then every time he went live, that was a success. And I think that's really where he made the connection for the rest of it. I think that really set the tone for his successes career-wise for the rest of his life, was as a live performer rather than necessarily a recording artist or, an actor other than stage. And again, the singing when he's on stage is completely different. He sings, you got that early dreamy, you got the rock and roll kind of gritty, and then you got his stage when he's on stage. It's a completely different type of singing that he does. I'm sure that's on purpose, but it's kind of interesting just to listen to the different tones and mannerisms that he uses.
What are your thoughts on his live album when he was touring over here? Where do you rate that? Because a lot of people say it's up there with Frampton.
I always enjoyed that. Even back then, I was thrilled to get that and listen, the Screaming Girls and the songs themselves, I really, I really enjoyed that. And I was always disappointed in the packaging. I didn't think they really, in America, I don't know how they packaged it overseas, but here in America, it was just nothing to it. It was just a front and back cover and then sleeve. I mean, that definitely deserved a gatefold. It would have been nice, maybe even a 2-record set, but... Well,
it should have been a double.
Right.
There was so much material that they could have put out. And this is why so many people now are crying out for a complete deluxe box set of the unreleased studio recordings, but also the unreleased live recordings.
Both. Either way, both would be nice. Just getting the right powers to do it.
Listen to us, people. Listen.
Yeah.
Although you still enjoy Cherish and Rock Me Baby, have you got an appreciation of his work completely across the board?
Definitely. There's a couple albums that I'm not as familiar with, even though I bought them. One was on cassette because cassette was real popular at the time. And so that was Then You Used to Be. To this day, No Bridge I Wouldn't Cross is among my favorite. I put it in my top 5. I love that album. I love the song. The album that came from, but there was one where he did some remakes. He did a reversion of I Think I Love You. I thought his remake of that was really great. He did a few Partridge Families, but they were new versions and they were perfectly suited for that time. Yeah. So it would have been nice if that had gotten a little more airplay, because it definitely, I remember one reviewer even made a comment, if it had been recorded by some other artists, it would have been a huge hit. But since it was David Cassidy, that was the reason. It was obvious.
It's an interesting observation that you have over there, Dale, because over here, he didn't come really with any Partridge Family baggage. Mm-hmm. He came as himself.
Well, you see, and I think I'm kind of halfway between my American cohorts and you guys, because, I went right from Sound Magazine to Cherish. There wasn't that whole year of the Partridge Family for me, so I saw the difference. I felt the difference between the Partridge Family song and the David Cassidy recordings. Even at the time, I liked both. I liked it all vocally. But it's interesting how that worked out.
In the story that you shared in Cherish, you suggested that you could easily relate to David's relationship with his father because of the distant relationship you had with yours. You met your father at a family funeral, and he actually asked you if you still like David Cassidy. I just wonder if you can explain how much that meant to you.
It meant the world to me. It was interesting, and I've thought about since then, I thought, well, wait a second, how did he even remember? How did he know I liked David Cassidy? Overnight, I went from having a father to not having a father. So it was like having a father that passes away. In hindsight, I wondered, how? And then I remember one year, obviously it was through my mother that he knew, because I remember one year I got the David Cassidy guitar for Christmas, and I'm thinking, that's right, that was from him. So that's how he would know that I liked David Cassidy, or that I used to like David Cassidy. So that's why he was asking me. And so, I think, okay, it's funny how you remember things late after the fact. Because then I wonder, like, so every time he saw David Cassidy, did he think of me over the years? Because after that funeral, when we had our little visit, a little walk, I saw him maybe twice after that over the next 2 years, maybe, briefly. And I mean, so briefly. I remember being in a car with him and my mom once, and then something else. But it's to the point where the memory isn't really, it's so foggy. It was so quick, So the funeral one was very, very vivid. Closest thing I ever came to seeing my father again was, and I've shared this with you, I'll tell it here, is in a dream. In the mid 90s, I think early to mid 90s is when it was, 1990s. And in the dream, he was on his deathbed. And he was asking me for forgiveness for abandoning us when I was so young. And I remember telling him that for whatever reason, his life had to take a turn. And that turn just didn't include us. I said, I never felt like I had a bad father, from the perspective of a 5-year-old, which is the perspective I have as a father. He was a great father. I just didn't have one for as long as most people do. And that seemed to, he was at peace. That made him happy. That seemed to me, he was at peace. And then I woke up from the dream, and I remember just being so like, what just happened? It was so real. It was the real. And mind you, I hadn't thought about my father in years. I was an adult. I was working. I was paying bills. I was partying on the weekends. I hadn't thought about, he wasn't in my conscious for decades. And shortly after that, my mom got a letter. My dad had passed away, and that she was going to start collecting from his pension. The date of his death lined up right when I had that dream. And I remember thinking, there's no coincidence there. I'm not a religious person. I never have been, but I've always believed in the afterlife. I just do. I don't see how you can live life and not believe in the afterlife. I think, if you've ever experienced the death of a person, a loved one, like in that case, it was a dream, but it was pretty real dream, But when my mom passed away, you couldn't have asked for perfect, it was in a hospice. She had cancer. She was lucky she didn't have a lot of pain until that very last end. And You know, it was me and my Bruce was there. I had a couple aunts, some cousins, and a couple of my mom's oldest friends were all there at the bedside. And I remember at one point I was talking to my aunt, and Bruce nudges me because something was going on with my mom, you know, and the nurse kept coming in and going back out, and she was getting ready to leave, I guess. I remember I stood up, I kissed her on the forehead. I said, I love you. She smiled and she was gone. You know, something's going on. There's something on the other side. You see that person actually leave their body and with a smile. You know, I've always wondered if she met her baby on the other side.
Undoubtedly.
I mean, at that same time, when she's, you know, when she smiled. I mean, it was, but you can't go through something like that and not believe, whether you're religious or not. You have, I don't know how, I can't anyway. I know there's more out there. You know, with my father, it was, I kind of had closure there in that dream.
You did see him in concert in 2002, didn't you? But what happens when someone you've idolized all your life stands there before you?
Well, it's pretty incredible, actually. I mean, and can I tell you a story about how I got to know that he was even going to be in concert? Because the concert was 4 hours away from here. I work for the United States Postal Service, and I sort the mail by machine. Well, when we sort the machine, it comes in trays. And we pretty much see the top of the mail, and we might see the stamp. But, you know, we lift it up and put it in the machine, and we empty it that way. So we rarely see the front of a piece of mail. Well, one day I'm sorting the mail, and can't remember. I think I'm taking it out of the mail. A piece of mail is kind of sticking up a little bit. Well, so it catches my attention. I said, well, what's this? I pull it out. Well, right there's David Cassidy's picture on the cover. You know, it's a single piece of mail advertising. I'm like, well, what's this? Advertising his concert that's coming up in Aurora, Illinois, at the Paramount Theater in Aurora, Illinois. It might have been for the next year. It might have been their schedule for the year or whatever. So, of course, right away, I write down all the information that's on there, phone number or whatever. And it's the first time I saw Bruce or talked to Bruce, I said, well, I know what I want for my birthday. I want to see David Cassidy in concert. Okay. And Bruce is good at buying tickets. Me, I'll buy a ticket, you know, I'll be like, it'll be, if it's like a big arena or whatever, I'll buy a ticket and he'll be like, well, that's not a very good seat. Where'd you get that? So he'll take it, he'll go get a better seat somehow. I'm like, so he was able to get one, you know, I don't know. I certainly I want to say it's fourth row, but the way it was, it seems a lot closer because I think the way that the row set, they kind of curved around the stage maybe. So by the time we were at the end, so by the time it got to us, it curved closer to the stage. So I don't remember anyone being in front of me. But again, you know, there could have been people. I don't remember people being in front of me. There certainly wasn't anybody on the side. I think I was on the last person in that row. Yeah, but it's very exciting. I mean, because you know that kid in you is coming out, even though you're 40, whatever years. I don't even know how old I was at the time, but 2002. But anyway, yeah, it was very exciting. You know, when he does, I'll meet you halfway, and of course, all the women. I'm going to say girls. So all the women go up to the stage, you know, and but there was a point where he does Summer Days. He started Summer Days. And I'm like, I don't know what, I was just so excited. I love that song. I love that song, you know, and he started on the other side of the stage and then worked his way over. And then he was in front of us. And I don't know, I just felt the need to stand up. I stood up, you know, I was the only one, nobody around us, you know, we're standing up. They were all sitting down, but here I was, and I kind of fingered number one, you know, put my hand out, number one to him, you know, and made the eye contact and all that. And he acknowledged it, you know, he kind of nodded and winked or whatever, and then continued on with this song, and then moved on to the other. And and then I sat down, you know, once he walked away, once he made that acknowledgement, I thought, okay, well, I better sit down now, you know, everybody else says. And I often wonder what look he was seeing in my face. You know, a few years later, let me bring you this story, because I kind of wonder if it's in tune. About 4 years later, there was a comic convention I went to, and they were celebrating the 40th anniversary of the old Batman TV show. Okay, so all the living cast members were there. They had, you know, Adam West, Burt Ward, Julie Newmar was there, Lee Merriweather, Yvonne Craig. They were all there signing autographs. And I was in line. I was halfway in line, in the middle of the line, to see Adam West, because I had a poster for them to sign. I'm in the middle of this, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, am I going to cry? I actually was getting emotional, you know, and I thought, no, okay, get yourself together. This is crazy. But even though I was imagining that 5-year-old enjoying Batman, as a kid. And I got my composure. Okay, and that was fine. I went through everything fine. But then they had a Batmobile there. They had a replica of the original Batmobile. And you could have your picture taken sitting in it. So, and then they give you an 8x10 or whatever size. It was about an 8x10.
Yes.
And so I go in there and she kept saying, smile, now smile. And I said, okay, I'm smiling. Well, she gave me the picture. I'm looking at it. I'm like, I could have swore I was smiling, but I look so sad. I look so sad. I'm like, I look like I'm going to cry. I mean, I was that happy, I guess. And I wonder, now, did I look that way for David? You know, I wonder if he's seen this, you know, but definitely the 8-10-year-old inside me definitely came to life on that night. You know, it was interesting. The next day, Bruce and I, well, it was 4 hours away, but Bruce lived halfway between there and here at that time. So we went from his house, and then